Coming to you from top secret field offices worldwide, these brave men and women fight a battle for truth, justice, and good, clean data. These agents of change make up the Bureau of Records, Objects, and Standards. They are the Data Bros.
Everybody, welcome on board to a very special episode of the Data Bros. That's right, the Data Bureau of Records, Object, and Standards. Normally, it is myself, Jeff Figley, accompanied by my two wonderful friends, Django and Brian. Say hello, boys.
Hello, boys.
Hello, friends.
Hello. But I get to drive the car this week and next week because I'm sort of looking at my friends as subjects to poke and prod and question. This week, we have invited and have two incredible guests. First of all, one of my favorite retailers in the entire comic industry, Katie Pride from Books with Pictures. Katie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Jeff, I'm so happy to be here.
Oh my goodness. Katie, for those who don't know, runs one of the best stores in the world in Portland, Oregon, and very courageously led me through my first group activity, the very first ComicsPRO I went to. Always holds a very special space in my heart. Katie, you won a pretty big award last year.
2022, which is 2 years ago.
10 years ago.
Oh my God, the time.
It's, yes, I did. I won the Eisner Spirit of Comics Retail Award, which is actually kind of too many words for kind of a big deal award. I want it to be a shorter name. But yeah, I got to be the best comic shop in the world for a year, and then I passed it off.
And I stand by it even to this day. That would alone be enough for a Data Bros episode where we could talk about all of the things that would happen. Katie Pride, quite a guest in and of her own right. However, we packed Santa's sack roll full this week, my friends.
Wait, there's more? There's more?
Wells. Well, there's wells. There's well more. I'm feeling good. I'm sipping on this water over here. We are joined by the incredible Jessica Wells. Jessica, oh my goodness, I haven't even seen you since I got to have a very wonderful heart-to-heart conversation at the end of ComicsPRO. It is great to see you.
It is great to see you too, and that was a lovely heart-to-heart. I hope we have more of them, Jeff.
You are a powerhouse in the comic and book world because you have a position that I'm going to ask you what it is so that you can tell me rather than me fumble through it and give myself an opportunity to call you Jennifer again. So Jessica, what is your, outside of being the arbiter of good data and moral integrity in a world of publishers and distributors, do you want to tell the listeners what it is you do?
Moral integrity. That's real lofty there. Sure, I work in customer operations, and it is a unique role where our group has the luxury of liaising between our retail partners as well as our salespeople, fulfillment, data, IT teams, et cetera, to improve supply chain efficiencies, of which data is a huge part of that.
And Brian has a little something prepared because as you do, in fact, work for Penguin Random House, it's worth mentioning that
the opinions expressed on this podcast are those of Jessica Wells and Jessica Wells alone and do not necessarily represent the opinions of Penguin Random House or any of its individual affiliates.
Thank you so much, Brian. The four of you have gathered into my office space because the four of you are the separate sort of figureheads of, we call it the COMET Standard.
It's the Comics Metadata Working Group.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Better.
The group is the ComicsPRO Comics Metadata Working Group, which produced a standard called the COMET Standard.
So Katie, just get up on the pulpit and tell
I
our
just
friends
want
what
you
it.
to know.
No, I'm here and I love it because don't assume, and I appreciate you for this, that I know what I'm doing. So. Because I don't. There was an amount of me that when I was about to say this was like, oh, I don't know the group name. So Katie, where one of us ends, the other picks up. So please, I want to hear from the four of you if you all want to talk about kind of what this thing is that was birthed just over a year ago.
Yeah, Katie, what would you say the 30-second elevator pitch for the ComicsPRO Comics Metadata Working Group?
It's not so easy.
Like the Eisners, maybe we need a tighter
name. I mean, I think that what we say is that it is a cross-industry working group of stakeholders from publishers, distributors, software, point of sale people. I never know what to call you guys. And other interested parties, including data professionals from outside of the comics industry, coming together to try and upgrade, professionalize, fix,
Agree upon.
yeah, data as it's used in comics product in the direct market specifically. So 1 year ago, the four of us sat on a panel at ComicsPRO and said we were starting a working group. But we were all working together for at least a year before that, really in the mode of even trying to shape what working on this problem looks like. And I have to say that due to probably sleep deprivation and relative traumas, I don't remember all of that.
The before
2 years
times
ago, we were already working on this. 3 years ago, we were
Yeah.
already
And then we
what
like
were we doing?
fell into some ooze, you know?
Yeah,
And like,
But then we decided what we needed was a multi-stakeholder working group, and we put that together. But I feel like there's a prequel here, which somebody might remember better than me.
Yeah, I think way back in the early pandemic era, we had all been involved in a ComicsPRO virtual meeting, and Marco had gathered a bunch of us together. I was one of them. I know Django was another, and I think Stu was there.
Yeah, was it
Comic
just
Hut?
the point of sale? So it was like,
I think so, yeah.
yeah.
but I feel like because you guys created a paper, because I remember part of my entry into this was trying to gather information about the direct market and how data needed to be handled and what did we need to do as Penguin Random House coming onto the scene.
Right. So
And I remember
this is exactly
reading
correct.
this paper.
So
Yeah.
it was a 2-pager that was just a like letter of concern.
Yep.
And it was after Lunar and not Lunar, but before UCS, thank you. But before PRH, and it was specifically in this moment of Lunar broke data so badly and we're all dying. And if you add PRH, we are just not going to make it through, was basically what that letter said, unless we pay really good attention to data. So we started there with that meeting, and that meeting produced it was just a like, what? I don't even remember what it was called, but it was authored by ComicsPRO, and it was like an official letter of this is a problem in the industry that is what brought Jess in for how much of this can we figure out before PRH comes on board as a comics distributor.
Penguin came out swinging with much better data than Lunar started with. We've seen a lot of iteration on it, but I think just in general, it was a lot easier to work with than the complete confusion that Lunar caused. And I think we were all better at dealing with incoming inconsistencies too.
Well, and I think if I remember right, Lunar's data was the better of the two in terms of Lunar and UCS. And UCS was doing something like totally different. And Lunar had kind of adapted Diamond's information right from the beginning.
But the key thing about that was that Diamond was still putting out the full data because they were still producing it for the European and UK partners. So Diamond was still putting out a full set of data, even for stuff that they were no longer the primary US distributor on. And UCS was putting out an entirely different set of data. And Lunar was putting out a closer to Diamond, but still unique and special in its own snowflake way.
And I think too, though, like we had the luxury of time. Right. We had the luxury to read this paper. We had the luxury to speak with all of you. And we had the luxury of 6 months at least between the time it was announced that that we were getting into this game and when we actually started shipping books. Right. So we, unlike others, we had the luxury of time, I think, a little bit. And then not to say that, our file is also unique, which is then going down the story of.
So I think that we've touched on sort of what this group is, and we've talked a little bit about multiple streams of data and trying to maintain the integrity of data. But for any of our listeners, like perhaps my mother, who don't actually know at all what that idea is, and it was really cool, like at this year's ComicsPRO meeting, as y'all are talking about this stuff, you're very, very in the weeds and know a ton about it. Like when Django gets angry at a barcode. and I'll be in a group of people and he'll talk about, why it's upsetting or something. And I can realize that like there's a gap between anybody around him's ability to appreciate the fact that he's absolutely correct about this thing. So I'm curious, can anyone of you four kind of maybe mention ways that the data was being presented that was problematic and what it was that specifically made decided a change needed to happen? Django specifically, I've heard you talk a lot about it. So if you, any of the retailers.
I think the biggest one that we ran into immediately was inconsistencies in series codes, which meant that it was hard to subscribe people to comics as a retailer and hard to create that infrastructure as a software developer. And then like another thing, this is much lower tier, but I think highlights how difficult the data is to put out consistently, is creators' names, where Diamond had one format with last name comma first name, but they could only fit one creator in. Lunar came on board and started squeezing multiple creators in with a different first and last name situation. Brian Michael Bendis makes the whole thing explode no matter what you do. So like when I'm thinking about what can we do to make comic book data better, I think about Brian Michael Bendis's name and how can we solve for every iteration of that confusion.
That's a good one. And then there's also just changes. Two different companies would have an entirely different structure for a series name. Diamond truncates things. So beneath the trees where nobody sees is beneath trees where nobody sees, which is a significantly different title. And we see that kind of with every distributor. And so things like that were
something killing children.
Oh my gosh,
TMNT in all of its various forms. These are all really stressful to search for. And if the title just exists differently, what you wind up with when you're dealing with three streams of data is what looks like three different products that are all the same product.
And comic shops rely on being able to subscribe their customers to comics that come out regularly or graphic novels that come out regularly. It's incredibly important for any store in the world to be able to do that easily. So yeah, when we saw multiple distributors coming up, when like what happened during the pandemic, yes, it became very hard to be a comic retailer. So I just want to make sure all of our listeners can appreciate the gravity of what this problem was. Yeah.
And I feel like there's two problems. One problem is that the data format as we had it prior to the fragmenting of data is something that was created in 1997 and updated in 2001 and is basically 22 years old without any updates since then. 22 years old. The data standard can drink. And that's the Diamond master data format. It is adequate, but it is so far below the standards of metadata that exist in modern online book selling in any other format. Like it is, when it was standard, I would say that it was not good enough, that it already needed to be modernized and standardized. And then we had this fragmentation where we had this thing that had been at least standard, even though it wasn't good enough. And then this proliferation of standards across distributors. So we are trying to solve for both of these problems by creating a new modern standard that also we want to get all of the publishers and distributors on board with using.
And Jessica, you had something?
Yeah, and just to actually build on that, something that was surprising to me being new to this marketplace was actually just how manually everybody works. And not everybody, but a large percentage of the marketplace works. And so now here, as Katie's saying, we have bifurcation of the marketplace. So we have three different file types, three different sources of data that all of these shops are touching manually, and I think that as we try to bring the industry into the modern age and automate more and save everybody time, I think that this is the way that we have to go.
I agree. Way back when, probably 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I started building a mapping document that would tell me what the equivalents for Diamond's different fields were for Lunar and UCS, and then eventually PRH. And there was an epiphany when I was doing the PRH one that there was tons of data that they had, which nobody else had, which meant that everybody had access to it, but they weren't exposing it in some way. And a lot of that is Onyx data, which is book market data. Suddenly got very British. But
well, it
but
is
that
managed by
data,
Editor out of
There you
the
go.
UK, so you're just getting on theme here, Brian.
But that data already exists. So every trade paperback exists in the Onyx system. And there was some resistance and hesitation that us conforming to a more Onyx-like thing would make our data more vulnerable to being taken by bad actors. And I never really bought into that. The fact of the matter is that data was out there anyway.
And then I feel like the other thing worth saying is that, like, I'm a comic book store owner right now. I have been a non-technical tech person for most of my career. So before I did this, I was a consultant for emerging tech companies. And a lot of what I did was sit down with engineers, learn what they thought their product did, turn that into training for a sales team, and then train the sales team onto how to sell the product that their engineers were actually making, because there's this gap in software sales where the sales teams will often get really excited about what they imagine they're selling, and it can have a disconnect to what they're selling. I also spent a lot of time sitting down with engineering teams, learning how their tools worked, and then training their customer support teams on how to support those tools. So that sort of translator role between technical people and non-technical people is one of the ways I made my living before I sold comic books. And so when we were in this place where there were clearly these technical problems, and then these very non-technical comics retailers like yelling at engineers and feeling like they weren't being heard, because yelling at engineers, spoiler alert, never works. They don't, it's not. But then also the communication coming out was in this very reserved way that engineers like to talk, that is intentionally specific and guarded. And, Scotty says you underpromise and overdeliver. That is how engineering works.
Yep.
But then it would reach the ears of these non-technical retailers, and they would be like, they're not even trying. And so I feel like the reason that this committee was a good place for me to sort of make a project was because of that background, that I've always been in this interpreter role between technical and non-technical people. I don't code for crap. You don't want my code. But I'm very good at talking to people who code, figuring out what they're doing, and then moving that information to other people. Which in this case, I feel like is a lot of what was required. The other thing is sitting in a room full of people who each have very high titles at their own companies, and encouraging them to communicate with each other, which is also challenging.
That was a big part of this whole thing.
Yeah.
And I heavily identify with the way you just described yourself, Katie, of like sort of finding comfort in an intermediary, role, which is definitely what I see in myself, especially with Django being highly specialized and intelligent about like three things. But
Indiana Jones, Legos, and something else.
Parenting.
But so then how did the four of you begin trying to tackle this problem?
We'll get you right back to the show after these important messages.
Hi there, Carrie from Murphy's Apple Juice here to tell you more about our continued exciting direction for Murphy's Apple Juice. After a lot of soul-searching and market research, the board of directors of Murphy's Apple Juice LLC is announcing our new subsidiary, Murphy's Juice Packaging Corp. LLC, focused solely on sustainable packaging, including our industry-first, patent-pending Tetra Pak system, which uses apple cores and peels in a 100% fruit-based compostable package. We're also rolling out our new Murphy's Juice Packaging Corp. LLC slogan. It's great for juice, but it's not just for juice. Stay tuned for these and other incredibly important announcements in the weeks and months to come.
Put it in your mouth and you drink it. Drop an ice cube in there and flick it. It's Murphy's apple juice. And you want some juice and you want it in your mouth. To get an apple and suck that juice right out, or go to your local grocery store. Ask for Murphy's and ask for more. You put it in your mouth and you drink it.
Murphy's apple juice. It's the shape, not the taste, but it's also the taste, which is pretty dang good.
All right, now, back to the show.
I remember Comics Pro last year, sort of the idea of like, all right, cool, meet you all back here in a year. And I was like, wow, I'm excited to see how to even begin doing this thing. And I attended a number of the meetings that you were doing, but like just sort of talk about it, and you're all heads in your own right.
It's like a Rocky montage of putting together the team.
Yeah.
I can write
And I
some
mean, I
music for
really,
that.
I do kind of feel that, we had this idea, but it wasn't necessarily fully formed. And then we all met in Pittsburgh and we're like, we have a panel that we're gonna do on Friday.
Yeah.
Maybe we should build some slides. Maybe, spoiler alert, that kind of happened this year too. But
We're not.
But
no,
I just
we don't share
remember-
those.
Are we not supposed to share the skeleton? Sorry.
I'm for
No.
the skeletons. That's
Bring
what
bring the skeletons out.
But
yeah.
what the wine is for.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in the hospitality suite with Stu and us
Yep.
talking about the panel and what we wanted to talk about. And I remember some, nice, like heated debates too. And then maybe it moved to somebody's hotel room because we got kicked out of the hospitality suite because we were still going strong on what our message was going to be
As
on
the
that
like
dais on
social
Friday.
level in that room rose.
Yeah.
More
I
and
mean,
more
I
drunk
think,
people
yeah.
came in, and like my inner librarian was like, "Shh, we're working now."
I know. We kept
Nobody
getting like
was interested
intoxicated
in-
people
No.
sitting at the table who's like, I've got some good input. And it's like, if you haven't been here for the last 40 minutes, you could just hold it.
Yeah,
there.
so then we had to take it elsewhere.
Yeah.
So, but
But I-
that's okay because Garside
Yeah.
made us old fashions in his room. and that
Exactly.
was-
And
That
I
is
do
my
feel like
superpower.
some of the magic happened there, right? Like I feel like
agree.
we really bonded as a team there and
Well,
we
and
really
there was,
yeah.
there was the specific, like there was a question of, do we want to build a clearinghouse for good data? And that was like, what if we could just magically make a space where the data was always perfect? And if it wasn't perfect, we could make it perfect in that space. And then we could put it out into the world. And we could just pass everything through this like hourglass with clean data in the middle. And
And
Jess
then
gave us like 6 good reasons for why we should not create a magical clean data
I
space.
did. I had such a I was the only dissenting opinion in this room on this fact.
But you were so clear and you were so smart about it. And I'm still not sure that it's the right path, but I think that it's the right path for right now.
But damn it, we
Okay,
like
we can
Jessica
agree on
Wells.
that.
So yeah.
Yeah, give Jess 3
Um,
minutes and she can make you sure that it's the right path again.
Yeah.
Well, and mostly what Jess gave me was a hope that if we create better guidelines and then really encourage the publishers to come on board with those together, that a lot of the problem comes from not intentional neglect, but rather just from the absolute lack of standards.
Yeah,
And
and
so
lack
the
of
right
structure.
And so the right starting point is structure and standards.
I also think that we should give the flowers to the unofficial 5th member of our steering committee, because Jeff in that meeting, and I don't know how much you guys know about this, there were a couple of times that I almost walked out of that meeting due to some tensions that were going on, and it was being held in my room, which would have been really uncomfortable.
Was
Everyone
the tension,
involved.
was the
Jeff,
tension between you and Stu?
I can't. I'll neither confirm nor deny.
Very
I
good.
said-
Yes, go on.
But no, but there was a couple times where things got kind of heated, and Jeff has this amazing ability to put
Embarrass
on
him.
a certain no, but because he was kind of divorced from all the conversations that had happened before, he would ask these pointed questions that were coming from a place of like honest, like curiosity and not knowing what we were talking about. And they like redirected our conversations in a couple of ways that like totally engaged everybody. And just when you could see people pulling back, Jeff would be like, well, what about blah, blah, blah? And then everybody kind of got re-engaged, and it was magical. And
It was
it was
masterful.
honestly, yeah.
Thank
it
you.
was-
And I
You're very
agree with
sweet.
everything Brian just said. And I will also add that and Jeff, I have no idea if you were thinking about this or not, but you were also very pointed of like, so during your talk, what are you going to say? Because we
Yes.
kept talking
Yes.
about what could be, what could be. We were
100%.
not focused on
Yeah.
what we were actually going to say on this panel for
100%.
hours. For hours.
Yeah.
And you kept driving us back to like, so you have a mission that you're
I
not.
empathize without any control, and Django is one of my main sources of that. We've been together for like 10 years now, so like if I get a sniffing of anything that Django could be doing that could make him look dumb or be unprepared for or whatever, I get very defensive or just like very mama bear about it. The way, so you created this incredible thing that the way that I picture it is that everything that comes out in the world of comics there is kind of floating bits of information about all of it. Whether it's a single issue, you've got writer and artist credits, you've got the volume, you've got the cover artist, you've got which issue number, all of this. There's an insane amount of minutia that could go into everything, and different distributors are kind of picking what was relevant to them. And what the four of you kind of helped design, and this is a lost metaphor because I don't fish, but like the perfect empty tackle box where you could take the ethereal floating aspect of a comic book, and as long as it had these perfect little holes for all the different things that you could be using for fashing. And you basically said, like, if you can make all of these areas for information, it will work. And I think that was an important distinction, especially this year at ComicsPRO, some of the questions being like, well, what are you doing with the data? And it's like, no, we don't have the data. We're teaching you how to translate or how to organize it and give it to people so that it can be usable for everybody. And so, yeah, the four of y'all's tackle box is impressive.
Where was the tackle box analogy at ComicsPRO?
I love this metaphor. I often
great.
think about my friend who is a database designer by profession. That is how he has spent most of it. Is like a caboodle.
My sister
bringing the female energy in here.
The moment when he realized that spreadsheets are like that databases are how he organizes his brain. Was that when his child got really into Legos and he organized the Legos by color, and then he organized them by number of dots on the Lego, and then he realized that he also needed to organize them by like how tall they were, and also probably by if they came from a special set, and that we now have too many parameters for a single set of drawers.
Katie, that's exactly how the metaphor started, actually. I said it to Django, and I was like, oh, it's like when you're doing your Lego set, your little Lego sets, Django. He organizes everything before starting it, and so that's...
and now we have 108 compartments.
In which
that
you
will
can
maybe
organize
grow.
your Legos.
I had to hear the word field from Django for like a month before I was like, what is I can't conceptualize what a field is. You're talking about it's like a real thing.
Of our dreams? What?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Where you can
you've
put
built
your
it.
Legos across infinite dimensions.
Exactly.
But we did build it and are hoping that they will come.
And they will, because it is an elegant and I just can't think of an organization of four people that I trust and want to be on board with more than the group of the four of you. But segue, we like to keep our podcast to a tight 30, which is what we're nearing. But and we're going to get into it with these wonderful people in next week's episode as well. But before we get out of here, one thing I do want to ask Jessica, coming from the world of book, coming from the world of, grown-ups, and not 9 to 36 pictures per page. What was, like, you got waist deep in comic data and problem solving fast. And I'm curious, what was either like the most shocking or most difficult thing to sort of wrap your brain around in the approach to data and execution of product with the comics industry versus what you had seen otherwise?
Oh, Jeff, we're gonna need another tight 30.
Sorry, I thought maybe you would have like stored in your back of your brain of like, you guys care a lot about cover artists or something.
Well,
like
I will say no, there are some really interesting differences for sure. And I think, mentioned earlier was series codes, right? Series codes definitely exist in the trade book world, but it's used more by online retailers to group the books appropriately in the appropriate series because you can trust a code a little bit better than you can a string of text in many cases. But to learn that comic shops have customers that subscribe based on series codes, it just adds a whole nother level of weight to that one data field that does not exist in the book world. So there are many other differences, but that was definitely a clear one. And the fact on the book side, an ISBN has kind of moved away and graduated from needing to rely on prefixes. There are a number of players in the book world that still rely on an ISBN prefix, but then all of the TED Talks that Django and Brian have done on UPC barcodes and how they should be and how they should exist. Coming from the book world, I'm like, as long as the string of numbers is different from any other string of numbers, why does it matter? Because if it scans and brings up all the data that we're putting in these beautiful compartments, it shouldn't matter.
Now
But
we have the compartments. Maybe it will.
I hope you're better at realizing you're in one of those TED Talks than I am, because I get like 8 minutes in and then I'm like, oh, I'm here again.
Yeah, but I think one of the things coming from the book world that I recognized right away was the fact that these industry collaborative conversations can happen and they can work. They exist on the book side, and there has been many a wonderful standards and supply chain efficiencies and such that have come from all book stakeholders working together in this way. And so I really did have this clear vision that I think I pushed upon all of you guys and made introductions and was like, maybe this could really work. And so I think that was one of the clear things from my past experience that I felt very strongly about. At the same time, a lot of people who know me, I know I'm a Pollyanna. So it's like, I'm like, this could work, guys. Like, it could work.
And in comics, there are these history of rivalries where we have these bright spots like Avengers JLA, where briefly the competing baseball teams could play together and like make a beautiful thing. And then it all comes apart again. And it comes apart in ways that means that we can't even make that book anymore. And so there is this sense of like repeated wounding. Like there's these 70s stories about like active espionage between DC and Marvel that are like still, I feel like, loud in executives' minds of like, well, we can't talk to them because, not just because there's anti-collusion law, but like because they'll come and take our Skittles. And so I feel like there's actually there's a lot of defensiveness in a way that I feel like just doesn't exist on the book side,
right?
Because of this very weird history of like active espionage and sabotage in the comics market.
That's what comics are about. So real life has to be about that too for comic people.
And I think active history is such a useful word to bring up because Katie, I didn't know what you did pre-comics. But hearing you talk about that, it's fascinating. All four of you are bringing a very key aspect of what you did before or outside of comics to this discussion, to this idea of trying to standardize metadata. It's really interesting. The four of you have had the right experiences leading up to this moment to be able to engage in this thing moving forward. And that serves as a pretty good tease for next week, because this week we've talked about who we are and how we got to this point and kind of the miracle that y'all pulled off. And we're going to see what we're doing going forward next week. But before that, Django and Brian are going to lead us out of this.
All right. So I guess Jeff left us. So it's just you and me, bud.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Let's give them our socials.
All right. Well, I am Managed Comics on most platforms, just at Managed Comics. And you?
I am usually Django Boren, sometimes Django himself on most platforms. Comic Shop Assistant is on Facebook and probably some other places too. Comics Place is Jeff and my comic store. It's easy to find on almost all social media. Oh, wait, Jeff's gone. I'm Jeff, and you can get me at jeff@thecomicsplace.com and Venmo, but I don't know my own Venmo, so you're going to have to listen to an older episode and find out what it is.
Hey, real quick, Django, thanks. The shout out goes to Will Elmer for buying us a beer. in Pittsburgh.
He sent Jeff a yeah, well done, Will.
Well done, Will.
You can write into podcast@databrosinc.com. If you're on a platform that lets you review your podcast, please review it. 5 stars is best. 4 stars is acceptable, but 5 is best.
Yeah, 3 is right out. 3 right out.
3's a real bummer.
It's real
Brian,
bummer.
I'm going to show you the 1-star review we got for our comic store later. I read a bunch of those out loud to my girlfriend the other night, and we were howling with laughter at my ridiculous, restrained anger responses for each one of them.
I love it. I love it.
Tell your friends to subscribe wherever they get their podcasts. This is probably there. Data Bros Inc. Data Bros.
You know what? Tell your enemies too. Just tell everyone.
Tell everybody.
Yeah. Do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
All right. Does your mom like comic book data? She might like this podcast.
She might. She just might. Yeah. We will see you next week.
The Data Bros is a joint project from the teams behind Comic Shop Assistant and Manage Comics. Data Bros are Django Boren, Jeff Figley, and Brian Garside. Brian Garside produces and edits the episode. And you'll find more about the Data Bros online at databrosinc.com. Subscribe, like, and review the Data Bros on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts.